What's up, everybody? Thanks as always for supporting the show. It would mean a lot to me if you would take a second to scroll down and hit that subscribe button to the Hoops Tonight YouTube channel, and then follow me on social media on TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter so you guys don't miss any of our content over the course of this season. All right, let's talk some basketball. All right, moving on to Houston, Milwaukee. So, you know, it's funny. I've always been fascinated about this with basketball, but like every time you play in a basketball game, you find out pretty quickly what works for you and what doesn't, right? Like even from lower levels, like, you know, me playing in a men's league, right? Like we played in our championship game on Sunday. By the way, it felt good to be back, coming back from my Achilles injury. I've been playing for about 9 days now. First of all, I just can't believe how much I missed playing basketball and how important that's been for my mental health just to be able to go play again. But shout out to my squad that we have in the Sunday League. We've won the championship for the 4th time in the last 5 seasons. You know, old man basketball accomplishments for whatever those are worth, right? But it's funny because in that game we were playing, like it was a championship game, so it was a little more physical. It was a team we played a bunch of times, and like you start playing and you're like, oh wait, like when we run this action, they can't do anything about this. Like, oh, they're used to doing this, but as long as we do this defensively, that doesn't work anymore, and now that's been removed from the equation. Okay, we can help off of this guy, we can't help off of that guy, right? And then pretty soon over the course of the game, you identify like the 3 or 4 things that are like your biggest advantages, and then you do whatever you can to kind of hammer those things home. And I've always found that fascinating because I pick up on that sort of thing every time I watch basketball games. Like you start watching pretty quickly and it's like, oh, like this guy who used to be a post-up fulcrum for his team is not going to get as much separation in this particular matchup. That's an important part of this team's offense. What are they going to do now? You know what I mean? Like I'll just give you guys some examples from this particular game because I thought this game was a great example of how those like specific matchups can completely swing the way a couple of basketball teams compete against each other. So first of all, what have we been talking about with the Rockets all season long? So Ime Udoka has been leaning a lot on Alperen Sengun, right? Mainly because he's been the most dependable offensive engine for this particular team. Fred VanVleet in pick and roll, hit and miss, right? Depends a lot on whether or not that pull-up jump shot's falling, right? Jalen Green has a lot of ups, a lot of downs. It's one of those things where you look at the efficiency in ISO and you're like, oh, he's having a good season. And then you watch him other nights and you're like, man, this guy just doesn't see the floor very well. It's classic young guard stuff. It's a lot of good. It's a lot of bad. You know, Dylan Brooks is having an amazing season, much better than he was offensively in Memphis. That said, you know, not a guy that you look at as an offensive engine, right? The Jabari Smith Jr. has pretty much turned into a prototypical 3-and-D wing at this point. He's not doing a ton of stuff with the ball in his hands. And so their safest option is Alperen Sengun. And he's like a diet Nikola Jokic, right? Like offensive fulcrum that can run a ton of stuff in screen and roll, both out of dribble handoffs and out of traditional ball screens, and then can also work out of the post. But he's a great passer, excellent touch around the rim, can stretch the floor with a pick and pop jump shot. Like he's diet Jokic. The biggest difference is he's just smaller. But that's arguably the most dependable element of Houston's offense. And Brook Lopez just erased his post-up attack, just completely erased it in this game. And you could see how it caused issues for Houston offensively the rest of the game. Because what is usually a dependable element, Sengun's been one of the best post players in the league this year, just wasn't an option anymore. Brook is just too big for him. He couldn't get to comfortable hook shots. Most of the work that he did, because he still got to his 28-5 or whatever, which is his season averages, because Sengun's really good and he's going to make plays. But most of it was out of pick and roll. He had some success in the short roll, had some success making passes, but they erased Sengun's post-up game because Brook Lopez is big enough to handle him, right? The other thing too, Brook Lopez just was like, I'm not going to guard you when you pop to the top of the key. And so Sengun missed his first a pick and pop 3, and then he missed another one, and then he just stopped taking them and started catching the ball wide open at the top of the key and flowing into dribble handoffs and stuff like that, right? The point being, it's a great example of how like one singular matchup, Brook is too big for Sengun, changes the dynamic of an offense for an entire game. And like it actually became a problem throughout several stretches of the game when Şengün did try to force things in the post against Lopez and he wasn't able to score down there, especially down the stretch of the game. And I just thought it was a really interesting example of a little thing that changes the dynamic of a basketball game. Here's another little thing. Who do the Bucks usually start at the 2? Malik Beasley. Malik Beasley was sick, and so he didn't play in either game this weekend. They had a back-to-back Saturday, Sunday. So Andre Jackson Jr., who hadn't played in a single game over 20 minutes yet this season, which is his entire NBA career, ends up playing big minutes in both games and starting both games. What is Andre Jackson Jr.? He is a young, high-motor athlete who is especially gifted at defending on the perimeter. So what were they able to do? They were able to put him on Fred VanVleet and have Brook Lopez sit way back in his deep drop coverage. Now, if that's Malik Beasley, who's been getting absolutely torched on the ball in the deep drop coverage all season, giving up easy pull-up jump shots, now instead you're getting good back pressure and overall much better ball pressure from Andre Jackson throughout the game. Changes the dynamic of the game. Now, as a result, Dame's in a more achievable role on a young guard like Jalen Green, right? And in general, you're just making Houston work harder to get up the floor. Şengün can't post up. Fred VanVleet's dealing with a long athlete on him all game long. See how it just kind of changes the dynamic of the game? And then the interesting thing about it, because not only was Andre Jackson good defensively, but he just found a way to contribute on offense. The Rockets put Jalen Green on Andre Jackson Jr., and he was sitting in that low man position getting ready to help, ignoring Andre Jackson in the weak side corner. He's just crashing the offensive glass, outworking him. He had 4 offensive rebounds in this game. Multiple of them were coming out of the weak side corner, catching Jalen Green, not paying attention. He hit a corner 3 in this game when he got left out there. There was even this play. I clipped this one and I put it on my Twitter feed. But he gets the ball. So they run basically a ram screen for him. So they screen down, I think with Lopez, if I remember correctly. They screen down for him. He comes up and catches the ball to run a dribble handoff with Dame. And he just fakes the dribble handoff and quick rips back and with that pivot to his left. Basically the fake dribble handoff that you see Draymond Green do all the time at the Warriors, right? As a result, gets downhill. I think Jalen Green might have been guarding him, but he got downhill on him and engages the rim protector, Şengün, and does a nice little drop-off pass over the back of his shoulder to Brook Lopez, who's filling in behind him, and he gets an easy and one layup. And I'm like, this is what you're looking for. He's not going to shoot as well as Malik Beasley, but he is a significantly more impactful on-the-ball defender. And in this particular game, it's not something that you're going to be consistently getting from him because he's young and he's limited in some ways. But in this particular game, he demonstrated for you positive offensive impact. And I find it really interesting because this is a concept that I think I've been, every year in the NBA, I learn new lessons. We're always getting new information and our perspective changes, right? And specifically, one of the big things that stood out to me this year is the value especially in the regular season, but the value of a high motor athlete. And it does extend to the postseason. As we look back, you look last year, I put Aaron Gordon and Kentavious Caldwell-Pope in the high motor athlete category, right? Going to the Warriors, I put Andrew Wiggins and Gary Payton in the high motor athlete area, right? Go back to the Bucks. Obviously, Giannis is a high motor athlete. Drew Holiday, high motor athlete at the guard position. Those are all, you have to have real top tier athletes on the roster that also play hard all the time. It's a necessity, in my opinion, to be a successful regular season team. And what's interesting is, as we've seen, taking Drew out of the equation and bringing in Dame and Malik, 2 guys that are both undersized. Malik's a good athlete, not a great athlete. Dame at this phase of his career is a good athlete, not a great athlete, but 2 smaller, somewhat mediocre athletes for their position into those spots. Chris Middleton coming back from injury. Giannis has been just unbelievable this year, but that's Giannis. And Brook, suddenly they look a little slow, right? Suddenly they look like they struggle to guard on the perimeter. And so this is actually kind of interesting because it reminds me of what happened with the Lakers earlier this year. Same problem. It's Taurean Prince instead of Jaron Vanderbilt, and it's Austin Reeves and D'Angelo Russell. The front court guys are athletic, but the perimeter guys are not athletic. And so what did they do? They remove Austin Reeves from the starting lineup. Should it have been Austin? That's a different conversation. But they bring in Cam Reddish, 6'8", freak athlete. And even when Cam was out, Max Christie, 6'7", excellent athlete. And so because they bring these athletes in, all of a sudden, that primary athlete takes the toughest perimeter assignment, which makes everyone else get an easier perimeter assignment. Suddenly, the defense looks better. And I thought that was really fascinating because this weekend was a great example of that for the Bucks. You take one of those athletes out and you replace him with a bigger, taller, stronger athlete in Andre Jackson. Suddenly, he's taking the primary point of attack assignments. Everyone else has a more achievable job. He's doing a better job just applying ball pressure and fatiguing the Rockets over the course of the game. And you see the positive results. And I think that's a great example of again, for both teams, for both the Lakers and the Bucks, it's can Cam Reddish be your starting two for a championship run? I don't think so. Can Malik Beasley or Andre Jackson be your starting two for a championship run? I don't think so. So both of those teams are going to have to look for some way to upgrade that position. But I find that dynamic with what happened with with Andre Jackson this weekend as just another great example of that specific theory, which is don't underestimate the importance of in your starting five, having somebody that's taller, longer armed, and that can really move on the perimeter, and how valuable that is just as a baseline for your defense. To put it simply, all these teams want to run drop coverage. They all do, especially because they want to keep their big center as close to the basket as possible to protect the rim and to secure defensive rebounds. So that creates a challenging job for the perimeter defender. He now has to get over the top of the screen every time. Because if he doesn't, he's going to concede wide open pull-up jump shots to NBA guards, which hit them these days, right? So it's just a really tough job. And there are a lot of guys in the league who can do it, but will they do it? Will they put in the necessary work? So when you have a young athlete who has a high motor, who's willing to do that job night in and night out, and he's in your starting lineup, so you can set that tone from the start of every game, it's just an important foundational element. We were talking about the Thunder earlier. Every night, you're getting Lou Dort on your best player. If the Thunder go play Golden State tomorrow, Steph's sitting in the locker room and he's like, fuck, man, that dude's going to be up in my business all game long. This is going to be such a pain in the ass, right? He's going to play, if Oklahoma City's going to play Milwaukee, Dame's sitting in the locker here comes Lou Dort for 40 minutes, man. This is going to suck. You know what I mean? It's just a huge part of what makes a great defense, in my opinion. And again, we've talked about this concept on the show before, but when you see a lesser player slot into a lineup and look deeply impactful, it's usually a sign of just how important his role is and how devoid that roster is of that role. When you see inferior players step in and make starter level impact, it just goes to show you how important that role is and why it's so important to go try to find a starter caliber version of that particular player. I want to shout out a couple other guys or matchups in this particular game. The other thing that immediately was clear was Jabari Smith is too small to guard Giannis, and Giannis absolutely torched him, just bullying him in the post. Had a couple of key baskets on him at the end of the game, including a huge left-handed hook shot out of the post on the left block. Chris Middleton at the end of start of the fourth quarter hit 3 straight tough pull-up jumpers. He was picking on Tari Eason in switches, hit two in his face, hit another late clock one over Jabari Smith, and then there was a Jabari Smith jumper over Damian Lillard that got the lead down to 3 fourth quarter, and Chris Middleton hit a massive 3 over the top that brought the lead back to 6. He had an up and under reverse layup in the first half, slashing out of the right corner. Just game after game, Chris Middleton is starting to look more and more like Chris Middleton which is super encouraging. But to that point, and again, I went so long on the Andre Jackson thing, and I apologize because that probably confused this a little bit. But like, again, every basketball game, you find these clear advantages that you have, and it was clear that like Lopez was just going to disrupt a lot of the normal Şengün stuff. Andre Jackson just providing real athleticism on the perimeter. Jabari Smith was too small to guard Giannis, right? Chris Middleton, when he won the championship with the Bucks, he just was giving you 18 to 20 with just timely shot making. Just the ability to give him the basketball a few times a quarter, and he's going to be able to get to a pull-up jumper. He can make about half the time. That is the advantage. It's just squeezing extra drops out of the sponge, right? And like that's part of what makes the Milwaukee ceiling so high, is like that's pretty far down on the totem pole, but it's also a very dangerous thing that they can do. And then lastly, you could see at the end of the first quarter of this game, Damian Lillard figured out that nobody on the Rockets could keep him in front off the dribble. Even Dillon Brooks, who did a good job on ball, Dame found ways to use the screen to get past him and get downhill. Specifically, what Dame was doing that was really smart is he was using the screen twice. So imagine this. I'm on the left side of the floor. Brook Lopez comes and sets a screen. I'm getting ready to rip through to the right to get to the right side of the screen. Dillon Brooks does an amazing job, because he's great at it, at sidling up over the top and meeting you on the other side of the screen. Dame would then hit like in and out between the legs and go right back to the left. Brook Lopez would turn and rescreen Dillon. And it's like we talked about earlier, already challenging enough to get over one screen, but it's really hard to get over a second one, especially when you just expended a bunch of energy and balance getting over the first one. Then there's this nasty sequence. He goes to the right, Dillon beats him over the screen, comes back to the left through the legs, catches Dillon on the screen, gets downhill, Şengün steps up, he hits a nasty behind the back dribble to his right hand, pump fakes, Şengün jumps out of his shoes, and then he steps through with a left-handed layup. It's just ridiculous. And that you could tell that was what kind of like triggered the confidence. And then from there, he was just literally getting downhill, getting all the way to the rim, getting layups and fouls time after time after time. And then at the end of the first quarter, he wouldn't even call him for a screen. He's like, this is Aaron Holiday. Aaron Holiday can't guard me. Just hard right to left move, got downhill, drew the contact, rose up and knocked down a shot for the and one. Then he got the pull-up three-point shot going. He made 3 pull-up threes in this game. It was one of the few games we've seen this season where Dame legitimately looked like the MVP level offensive engine we know he's capable of being. And so all of that comes together to me to demonstrate what was the best picture I've seen this year of what the Bucks' top-end potential could look like. Damian Lillard as a MVP level offensive engine, a point of attack defender at the 2, not a shooter necessarily. That's not to say you don't want to upgrade that to a guy who can shoot, but what you saw is that it's immensely valuable in this defense to have an athlete next to Dame in the backcourt. Chris Middleton giving you 18 to 20-ish points on scoring in the margins. Giannis, who's just been insane. Like the dude just continues to be a complete and total wrecking ball in the entire NBA. And then Brook Lopez in a deep drop coverage, hitting pick and pop threes. Like that's what you need. You need all of those things. And if Dame doesn't play at an MVP level and Chris Middleton struggles to consistently get to 20 points and you don't have an athlete next to Dame at the 2, that's where they go from being championship caliber team to something beneath that. But that's the configuration. MVP level Dame, point of attack defender, Chris Middleton we saw in 2021, MVP Giannis, classic Brook. That's the formula. And I thought it was cool getting to see that this weekend because it's something we haven't really seen much from the Bucks in this particular season.